Hello, I'm Audrey Brown, and today in Focus on Africa, we are discussing the thousands of ghost workers in the Nigerian civil service. How did they get there? And will a new plan to flush them out work?
Somebody whom a colleague of mine interviewed who is a ghost worker, he just laughed when the president said he was going to come down on the said ghost workers. There's hardly any jitter in any corner of people thinking, this would be any different from previous threats by the sitting government of those days.
That sounds like a no then. In Nigeria, there is something called the Japa syndrome. Japa means to flee, and it refers to the numbers of people leaving the country by any means necessary to make a better life for themselves elsewhere. But fleeing doesn't mean leaving forever in this case. Many of these people, especially civil servants, leave their options open by not resigning from their jobs. Obviously, this is not ideal because the country is paying people who are not producing anything. They're called ghost workers. It's not a new thing in Nigeria, but why does it persist? I discussed this with Yusuf Akimpelu, our colleague in Nigeria. I'm going to start by asking you to first tell us this syndrome called Japa. What is it?
It's a system or a scheme of people seeking for better standard of living who basically just want to emigrate from their country, Nigeria, to other countries, often to seek a better life.
Right. And many people are doing it by any means necessary, whether they're going to study, whether they're going as undocumented migrants, or as if they're leaving to go and work elsewhere. So they're taking all kinds of opportunities. The reason why we're talking about this is because we're talking about ghost workers in the system in the Nigerian civil service. Tell us about what exactly the issue is. What is a ghost worker and how do they come about?
Yes, a ghost worker is a person who is on an organization or an agency's payroll, but is doing nothing of value to that organization. So it's often people who perhaps had been employees of that organization, but they are deserted or left, but they never indicated to their employers that they had left, and they continue to receive salary. And oftentimes it could also be fictitious names on government payrolls in whose accounts salaries are paid, but they are not doing any work for the government. And this is something that is endemic in Nigerian civil service. And that's why the government recently said it was time to nip it in the bud.
Before we get to what the government is doing about it, let's just point out that it's been an issue for very, very many years. Why does it continue? How does it continue? Is there complicity on the inside of the system?
Yes, there is a well-engineered network within the civil service. People within have continued to give cover to people within their circles who are used as fodder to continue to draw wealth and pay salaries from the government. And likewise also because the government themselves haven't really done enough to tackle the challenge because the highest officials to even those that are below. So it's a well-engineered network within the agency. Oftentimes the ghost worker come at a cost, often by dividing their salary between their supervisor who keeps quiet and then they are being paid maybe alongside other people like the HR representative. And there is also this long-standing belief within the system that people think it's just a way of getting a share of the national cake. It's an endemic system of corruption.
So this is a fairly new government of President Tinubu. What's he decided he needs to do?
Whenever there is revelation of this type, what we tend to see is the government workers are asked to tender their letters of employment and qualifications just to verify whether or not it is genuine. And government often always promise, as they have now, deployment of new technologies to check for new names and also employing independent auditors who would help cleanse the list that the government have. In the past, there's been deployment of several technological schemes like the Integrated Personnel and Payroll Information System, IPPIS for short. It's an automated payroll system which the government used to pay all federal government workers.
It's been a problem, as we said before, for many years now. So what were previous attempts to try and stop it? And how do these proposed by President Tinubu differ from the ones before? Is there any chance that they work?
All of these things that were said are things that have been done in the past. This is not to say the government hasn't taken effort. Like the IPPIS I mentioned wasn't always there. It was as a result of the series of news of discovery of thousands of ghost workers that the government introduced the scheme. But then, because the scheme itself, it's operated by humans, people can compromise and also just more or less get the loopholes within the system. So what the government is proposing this time is to tighten those loopholes. How much of willpower there is to ensure that that is done is left to be seen. And likewise, one thing has been missing in previous times. Whenever there is any news of this discovery, of course, there will be media rants about why it is not good or why it should be stopped, but you never get to see people who are punished for it. So people get to do whatever they like and they get away with it. So they say, why not? It's very lucrative. They have nothing to lose. It's more or less like having your cake and eating it, and you do not get to be punished for it. But it is hoped that this time, with the government talking tough, it will be different from the past.
So give us an idea of the sums of money involved and the civil servants involved, the numbers. What is the country losing in terms of person power and also in terms of revenue?
The recent time when there was discovery of almost 70,000 ghost workers within the system, when those were discovered, like some 3 months later, some new 58,000 were discovered. This was said by officials of the government, particularly the previous administration, of how endemic it is. So as they are flushing out some names, new names are popping up. And then this, because it is monies that are meant for genuine worker, are being given to fictitious names. So that means the government continue to lose revenue in tune of billions of naira, something you could imagine in millions of dollars. And the president is talking tough this time, particularly because it is a time of austerity when the government purse is very lean. There is the earning from major export of oil is also short. So having to tighten the loopholes from the different places where there is leakages is what the government is starting to do.
I'm wondering what Nigerians think about this. Do they think that the government actually will get to the bottom of it and root it out once and for all? Or is there a degree of cynicism about it because it really does rely on political will, the enforcement powers, and also people inside the system actually being scared enough to stop doing it?
People aren't exactly, particularly those within the system, they aren't exactly panicking. For instance, somebody whom a colleague of mine interviewed who is a ghost worker, he said he just laughed when the president said he was going to come down on the said ghost workers. That's because many people that have been caught being a ghost worker, but they've never been held accountable, they tend to do it and there is no repercussion for it. So there's hardly any jitter in any corner of people thinking, oh, this would be any different from previous threats by the sitting government of those days. One thing is sure, we do not know how far the government is willing to go. But one thing we've always seen is that talking tough has never been solution to this problem. Rather, action has proved to be the solution. But whether or not the government is willing to go all out is left to be seen.
The drain is enormous, I imagine. Are people angry about it?
There is always anger at it. Anger at the government for not doing enough. Anger by people who don't have a job and hearing there are people who are getting paid on multiple fronts. Anger at the fact that this has lingered for years. But on a general note, people are not necessarily agitated by it. They're indifferent about it. And that's largely because we've heard it before. This is not the first time. So why should we care this time? That's often the kind of cold shoulder you get to see from people. But definitely people want it stopped. People want it ended.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey.